Hi, I'm Kelly, Vice President of Operations at Safety Center. Just like most companies, I've been navigating how to adjust and morph our business processes during the COVID-19 pandemic. Our entire team has had to learn new technology, adjust to their remote work environments, and restructure the way we deliver our essential safety programs, all in a matter of weeks. While there is still uncertainty as to when, there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we will be reopening our physical campuses and bringing employees back into the workplace. What's next? Today, I'll be your host as we get perspective from a safety expert on what companies should consider as they prepare to reopen their physical places of business. Dick Monod de Froideville is a well-known name in the safety community. Dick has a Bachelor of Science degree in Health Science and Healthcare Administration and a Master's degree in Public Administration from California State University, Dominguez Hills. In addition to being a consultant, he's an adjunct instructor with the OSHA Training Institute at CSU Dominguez Hills and Chabot Las Positas. In 2013, Dick retired from Cal OSHA, where he worked more than 30 years in both the enforcement and consultation units. Since 1995, Dick has been actively involved in PASMA, the Public Agency Safety Management Association. He has served as vice president and president of the association for multiple terms. I could go on with this impressive resume. Dick, thank you so much for your time talking with me today.
You're most welcome.
Understanding that you don't have a crystal ball, when do you think California will be approved by the government to resume business as usual?
That's actually more of a political question. One of the things that's going to wind up happening from an epidemiological perspective, I can fully understand how government is kind of taking a step-by-step approach. One of the things that's going to inoculate the rest of what is known as herd inoculation kind of thing. We don't have anything to counter it just yet. So best guess in terms of inoculations, in terms of prophylactic medicines, another 18 months. But in terms of getting back to work, the governor in his latest briefing is stepping that up in terms of the protocols. And that too is going to have to be incremental. If for no other reason other than currently there's an awful lot of employers that still don't understand the current protocols as designed by the CDC. So everybody kind of has to be on board. It's one of these things that's one team that wins and one team that loses. So everybody fully understands the impatience. I'm suffering from cabin fever myself. And then so yeah, it's going to take a little time though. But I would probably guess that certain parts of the economy are going to wind up being open probably, and this is a wild guess, probably by around September or so, if not sooner actually, because we have done such a tremendous job in trying to control the spread of the virus.
Sure. The common phrase we hear all the time, and we use it in conversation around here, the new normal. What's your view on what the new normal is going to be in our country, and is that any different for California?
Yeah, the new normal is going to be pretty regional. Drawing on my, basically in general, the new normal is anything other than yesterday. And one of the biggest reasons why that is because life progresses, life moves forward. And any time that we're either forced or desire to change, the events, the situation, the scenarios, the outcomes from that particular action or inaction is by definition going to be the new normal. So that's more of a political term, but from a very realistic operational perspective, every day we wake up, every day we have a chance not to be mediocre, and that would become the new normal.
Great. Yeah. Many companies like ours, small, large, nonprofits, huge corporations, they're all facing uncertain financial futures. For those who are able to restart operations, what do you believe the new normal will be regarding keeping employees healthy and safe at work?
Right. It's the guiding documents nationwide is going to be the CDC. Should people decide they want to go ahead and visit the CDC, both Cal OSHA, Fed OSHA, and the CDC have got guidance documents and handout materials, training materials, informational materials, specifically focused on the type of business that you are. So case in point, just recently, the state of California, in keeping with Fed OSHA and the CDC, has put out a guidance document in terms of how to control the virus for the construction trades. They just recently put out one for agriculture. Because industries, because of the nature of that particular industry, small, medium, or large, are going to face challenges that are specific to that industry. And so it's very difficult to create kind of a boilerplate. And it's for that reason that the companies ought to make themselves available to those guidance documents. It just makes absolute sense. That way you know what is expected of you. Biggest reason why that is because, as every regulator will tell you, whether they have a badge or a gun or not, ignorance of the law is just simply no excuse.
Right, right. So thinking about retail, the retail industry or the entertainment industry, what special considerations should they be gearing up for?
Yeah, sanitation, decontamination, PPE. Those are the primary watchwords. Again, the nature of any virus, of the nature of viral epidemiology, is such where you want to try to identify, you want to try to isolate, you want to try to disinfect, and that's pretty much what it boils down to. So this is actually a really good place where retail, the entire retail industry, should re-examine the spaces in which they do business, meaning whether or not they are in a strip mall, whether they are in one of those gigantic retail malls. They can control the space that's in and around their particular business. Start from the access point, wherever the general public goes in. That's where you want to establish perimeters. That's where you want to establish distances. Plainly marked. If you don't plainly mark things, then people tend to not obey signs. That's just kind of a normal everyday thing with people. The other thing is that you're also going to have to make some adjustments in your staffing, and the biggest reason for it is the more you ask people to wait, the less tempered they become, or they have a tendency to become, especially since most people don't plan very well. So you might want to sit there and provide some additional guidance, some additional training in terms of how to recognize impatience in your clientele, in your customer base, and then react to that relative to a known operational agenda, a known operational protocol. De-escalating, especially in this day and age, especially during this kind of pandemic, you need to be able to recognize human poker tells. People are already short-tempered, people are impatient, people tend to be anxious. So you group all of those things, you need to make the necessary adjustment. And again, for California operations, if people are concerned, especially the retail sector, because now you're introducing one of California's, California is actually the only state in the nation that has a violence in the workplace program that is modeled. What that means is that if your listeners were to go to the Cal OSHA webpage, look up section 3203, which is the IIPT, right below that on the webpage, they'll have model programs for violence in the workplace. That is currently still the standard. And because your retailers, all of the retail industry, have direct contact with the general public, that is now a requirement. And that starts with a hazard assessment. Where are you located? Are you in South Central LA? Are you at the Lama Mall? Are you up in the Bay Area? Wherever those areas are, you know what the crime statistics are. And because you know what the crime statistics are, because they are publicly accessible, you need to make those adjustments operationally in order to compensate for that environment. Is that making sense, Kelly?
Yeah, absolutely. That leads me to another question. What regulations are there or expectations of Cal OSHA in terms of workplace violence training? for employees?
Right. That is contingent on the crime statistics. Case in point, if there are violent crimes, if there are break-ins, whatever that is, you only need to make the adjustments for that. The other thing is, and I'll class a case in point, just using this as an example. People that are operating AMP mini-marts, the Circle Ks, there is a historical, because people they tend to get more robbed in those locations than, let's say, at a retail center. You're going to have to make those adjustments. And again, basically your training that is defined in 3203A7 specifically, talks about training. It only needs to meet the requirements of the geographic location and the operation of that employee and that employer.
Do you foresee that Cal OSHA will hold employers liable for not being current with training, given our current pandemic operations?
Yes, absolutely. Monitoring citation output, and since I still have some of my old colleagues working on the inside, I can't refer to them by name now. I have to call them my confidential informants, but we stay in touch, and that has already started to happen. Mostly because there's a generalized expectation under the IIPP A7 that people, regardless of A4, by the way, let me backtrack a little bit. 3203A4 for your listeners. Take a closer look at the language there. It makes the expectation that hazards will be identified. The mere fact that we're currently involved with a pandemic automatically throws that particular subsection into play, meaning that that whatever company is currently still working, and those that are going to come to work once we step down on the shelter in place, are going to have to address that, because this will be a long duration thing. So if your listeners are currently kind of not recognizing that this is an absolute overriding requirement, have them reference 3203A4, because that does talk, there's specific language in there about doing hazard identification, and the pandemic is definitely a known hazard. Ergo, now it goes to 3203A7. It's going to require them to go ahead and do the necessary training to the degree that they need to train them on. And they can use open source available material. They do not have to reinvent the wheel, is what I'm suggesting. If you don't have to reinvent the wheel, don't do it, because there's more than enough information out there. Is that making sense?
It does. So online training, online safety education training services, would those suffice in meeting those training requirements?
They would, with one big caveat. Online training services, you or the employer, your clients, your listeners, have to understand that the proof in the pudding for training is going to be an interview process. So even FedOSHA has been kind of, and this is driven by compliance, by the way. The language in the code, 3203, talks about effective. That is a term that is not defined, unfortunately. So that kind of tells the employer, the stakeholder, that they probably need to define that. One way when it comes to training that they have to define that, if you're going to use, now there is no legal bar against using online training, but they probably ought to increase the frequency of their online training, or they're going to have to give a relatively rigorous test that is also proctored, because that term effective is going to be done by the compliance officer, and the compliance officer is going to ask a bunch of leading questions to the person that they're interviewing. And if the basic information does not come back, then he's going to deem that, and they would be justified, and the administrative law judges have sustained their citations by it not being effective. The rationale behind all of this is that the compliance officer, as well as the code, expects the rank and file to have some basic understanding that will help them move in the right direction in terms of controlling their own behavior relative to their own hazards. Is that making sense? So because that is the case, if I were to establish a percentage on it, even in my own case when I was a field agent. Probably better than 85% of the citations are based on the oral interview. And this is a problem that is a very historical problem ever since I was raised in the fellowship division. Employers see that because that is the most frequently used legal term within all codes nationwide. Everybody has to be trained. But then it doesn't specify specifically what needs to be trained. The notable exception being for some of the carcinogens, for lead, for confined space, or fall protection, where those specific codes actually identify the level of training that needs to be there. But for most things, and COVID-19 is no different. It is pretty much a death knell, much as it was for the bloodborne pathogens program, which kind of means that when they do the interview, and I'll give you a classic case in point. If I were to be role-playing and I'll be a compliance officer, one of the things I'll ask, just looking at the HASCOM program, which is a mandatory program, I'll ask, so what means and methods does your company provide you that would tell you about the material that you're dealing with? And they would hopefully say, well, that would be an SDS. That opens up the door. I'm going to ask them now, well, so what would you expect to find on this SDS? All right. First, I would ask them, what is an SDS? And the answer better be a safety data sheet. It is not sufficient to understand or to be able to parrot back the definition of an acronym. It is absolutely important for them to understand the link between a PEL and a TWA, because they're inextricably linked. And if they don't understand that relationship, how are they going to know how to protect themselves based on the information that was provided? COVID-19 is the exact same thing. As we move along, there are additional physiological symptomologies that appear to be present. So a compliance officer would ask, so name me a couple of the normal routine symptoms that you would expect if you displayed COVID-19 symptomologies. And we would expect that employee to be able to parrot back at least 3 or 4 of those known symptomologies. If they don't parrot that back, shrug the shoulders, glance over on the eye, then that's not exactly effective. And that's one of the more notorious reasons why when any compliance officer asks about training from an employer, they're going to ask, what was the delivery? Secondarily, who gave that? What was the means and method for delivering that information as content? That employer better be able to say, well, we don't just press forward on the keyboard. Because if all they say is, we're going to press forward on the keyboard, and there's no outcome measures, there's no means for testing knowledge, then that's going to be classified as ineffective. How that is determined is purely through the interview process. So they're linked, right? And so employers can't be short-sighted and say, well, we're going to do online training only. Boy, they would be doing themselves a disservice. It's far better to either go to a provider and have in-person training, because that is a way for people to reach each other, which also tends to increase retention, which also tends to increase understanding. And that's what a compliance officer is after when they measure that term. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. Absolutely. A lot of information, a lot of things to consider with employers in the last six to 8 weeks operating in, crisis mode.
Yeah.
Business is moving forward, but safety is essential, and it's good to hear that we need to keep doing it, keep it at the forefront of our mind, and as we return, make sure we are continuing to have robust safety programs in our workplaces. How can the community at large continue to play a part in helping us remain safe at work and when we go home?
When we go home, that's kind of an individual thing, but one is we kind of have to practice what we preach. And again, this has everything to do, and this is absolutely is when I host classes, one of the things I put an emphasis on to potential instructors when I train instructors, when I do other training relative to the rank and file, first line supervisors, the biggest thing is that you cannot show that you're not practicing what you're preaching. We have to walk the talk. So for employers and the general public that might enter their businesses, right up front, recognize that the current level of controls that exist on the overall population. Meaning, yes, we are still in the COVID epidemic. We apologize, but we value our employees. Will you please help us protect our employees so that they in turn can protect you? Everybody has to be on the same page. The nature of viruses, of epidemiology, is simply that the virus doesn't give a damn who it is. As long as they got a pulse and as long as they're breathing, they're going to want to infect that host. So the better messaging that we have right up front, speaking of retail again, if the retail folks would put big signs up front saying, hey, we'll help you if you'll help us, kind of thing. I want to help my employees. We need to help each other. That kind of messaging, and that's all about, you know, sales and communication and marketing. It's going to get through. You know, here in California, we're doing actually pretty darn good. Looking at the national outcome data in some of these surveys, you know, the general public is concerned, rightfully so. Again, because we are dealing with an invisible bioorganism, and it hates everybody. That's all it boils down to. So let's just get all on the same page.
Yeah, absolutely. Any parting words of wisdom?
Okay, your clients ought to investigate, and you can go online, and this is a really good time to do a gap analysis on your operation. What I mean to say by that is that if it works, see if you can make it better. There is no such thing, and this is consistent with two business concepts. One is business continuity, and the other one is continuous improvement. Interestingly enough, these two relatively recent concepts, known as HAS mapping, comes into play, and start looking at things like, well, when you're looking at HAS mapping, you're automatically going to identify known potential hazards, the operative term here being potential. The second thing that I strongly suggest businesses starting back up is look at your infrastructure. And here's the biggest example. If a company has a safety officer, good on them. But the safety officer in the org chart, where is the safety officer located? If the safety officer cannot articulate a strong enough argument, meaning that if they are only in an advisory capacity, that company is doing themselves a disservice. They need to have the players within their organizational structure be able to come together and work as a team, not look at each individual department. Case in point, HR. Well, who does the disciplining? Well, the paper comes out of HR. Where did they get the information to do the disciplining? Oh, from safety. But if safety can only act in an advisory capacity, HR is not likely to support them. And then, of course, we have risk management we've got HR, risk management, safety, and we've got another one. Workers' comp. There's one commonality among all of those departments. They've got to stop working as if they're independent units. They need to start talking to each other because, after all, that one common that they have are people. Right? So employers just simply have a very simple math question, and I use this in class all the time. You have a choice not to be average every time that you wake up in the morning. Don't be just so-so. Don't just rly on, we survived yesterday, we'll survive today, right? The idea is start looking at it in terms of, do I want to pay now or do I want to pay later? Simple math, very simple math. The question business people ought to ask them, it's not how much I make, it's how much I get to keep. Simple math formula. Do what you can to minimize the risk. Usually, in my experiences, keep in mind that when I was in service, I was pushing about 100 cases a year. times 33 years in enforcement, that's a lot of people I've looked at. And consistently, that is the problem. It's an organizational problem, not a production problem. It's an organization problem that creates the risks that eventually we're going to have to pay for. Is that making sense? Yeah, so it's actually kind of simple.
Yeah. Dick, thank you so much. We've been honored to have you speak.
No, I'm just saying things forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you all for watching. We will put Dick's consulting contact information on the screen for you if you'd like to reach out to him. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We will have future episodes. Be safe.